On August 25th at 2:05 a.m., Mark Laidlaw, former writer responsible for Half-Life's universe, posted a short story in the form of a letter called Epistle 3. Quickly, the internet came to realize the letter's purpose. However, many, especially in the media, misunderstood specifically where it came from. Taking a step back, in July of 2017, Mr. Laidlaw gave a few interviews, specifically one with Arcade Attack. He was asked, quote, "Do you have any idea whether Half-Life 3 will ever be released, and would you be willing to work on this title?" Mr. Laidlaw in response said, quote, "No idea, and I have no interest in going back. I had ideas for episode 3. They were supposed to take the series to a point where I could step away from it and leave it to the next generation. I hoped for a reset position between HL2 and HL3 that was as dramatic as the shift between HL1 and HL2. I honestly don't know if anyone else shared this goal, but it seemed important to me to give the ultimate freedom to whoever inherited the series, with my own personal set of loose ends tied up to my satisfaction. I was not able to do that. My intention was that episode 3 would simply tie up the plot threads that were particular to Half-Life 2, but it would still end like Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, with Gordon in intermediate space, on hold, waiting for the next game to begin." End quote. Episode 3 and Half-Life 3 are two different things in the modern day. Mr. Laidlaw wanted to pass on the series to a future writer after wrapping up the plot threads of Half-Life 2. Things like Eli, Alex, the Combine, Breen, and Mossman would be taken care of, and Gordon would be put back into the void so that when it came time for a new game, the slate was clean and the story could go anywhere. Speculation. It seems that Mr. Laidlaw was training new writers to take over when the time came. Chet Falisak and Eric Wolpaw from Old Man Murray were hired in 2004, and along with Mr. Laidlaw, they wrote both episode 1 and 2. By the time episode 2 had released, Mr. Falisak was already working more with Left 4 Dead, so Mr. Wolpaw was pretty much what was left. Episode 3 obviously never released, and Mr. Wolpaw worked on Portal 2 with Falisak and Jay Pinkerton. However, in modern-day Valve, all 4 of these writers are gone. It appears that episode 3 was meant to be Mr. Laidlaw's final Half-Life work, but everything fell apart, and 10 years later, Mr. Laidlaw had released what is most likely an expanded outline of beats, meant to hit at some point in development of episode 3. And it ends with Gordon in intermediate space, Eli dead, Mossman dead, Breen dead, and Alex held by the G-Man, and the Combine an impossible enemy to the Resistance. The letter did everything Mr. Laidlaw wanted to do with episode 3. All the Half-Life 2 specific plot threads were tied up. And this needs to be stressed. This is episode 3. Not Half-Life 3. To further prove this, on August 26th at 11:29 p.m., Mr. Laidlaw follows up on his story concepts and explains that in the real world, ideas come from anyone on the team, and his ideas are expanded upon, asking if there could be a spot to close out Barney or Dog, or if the explosion powers a time loop sending Gordon back to pre-disaster Black Mesa. What I find concerning is that these are all Laidlaw's ideas based on his own story. Valve doesn't have him to expand on these ideas anymore, and although it might be an unwarranted worry, I don't think Valve could match this creativity currently. Valve's PR during the lead up to the launch of the Orange Box included a few mentions of episode 3 and how Valve intends to end the story, and that they know how to do it.
After Orange Box, we have to get episode 3 out. We know how the trilogy ends, and there are a bunch of loose ends and narrative arcs that need to come to a conclusion in episode 3.
On top of that, the way episode 3 was developed was with a team working at the same time as episode 2, and the two teams leapfrogged each other.
3, and we're starting a 4th single-player content team, so they'll be sort of leapfrogging each other and releasing new content while the other groups are in pre-production and production.
So enough time had passed during development to allow Mr. Laidlaw to create many scripts, and 10 years later, the best ideas were transcribed into a letter, given to the public as a goodbye from Mr. Laidlaw to the community. The work itself is incredibly sad, however beautifully put together, with the opening and closing not only fitting within the story, but also shedding some light on Mr. Laidlaw's personal life. And that fact is important. Half-Life is not within Laidlaw's hands anymore, and the finality of the writing is speaking more towards Laidlaw's involvement with the series, and not the series itself. It's completely up to Valve to do something with the Half-Life franchise, and as we have seen through the many frustrating leaks meant to replace official communication, things have been done. However, these leaks pretty much stopped in October of 2015, and things have moved on to something called HLVR. Mr. Laidlaw's intention was to complete his story and give the next writer freedom within the canon, so anything aiming to do that, at least spiritually, was episode 3. Anything that was or will become, at least for the most part, Half-Life 3 will be completely unrecognizable. This does bring up questions as to why this even exists. Why did Laidlaw break the pattern of Valve's silence to give the community exactly what they wanted? In the initial email announcing his retirement, Mr. Laidlaw states that he considers Valve his second home, and he is still in contact with many people in the offices. So with this in mind, one of two things happened. major speculation. Number one, this was done with Valve knowing, and because Laidlaw truly wanted to release it, Valve allowed it. Some questions if so. Valve would only allow something like this if something could be learned, so what is Valve trying to learn? What sparked this to be released in the first place? And if Valve gave the blessing, why change the names? Or, number two, this was done independently, and the name changes have been enough to qualify it as an original work. Mr. Laidlaw called it a fan fiction. However, what would keep Valve from taking action in response? Even if this is Mr. Laidlaw, allowing this to pass shows a softness on the copyright, which is never a good thing in a court of law. Either way, whether Valve makes something has nothing to do with Laidlaw anymore, and Valve has tried many times. In 2012, the source code for Source 2007 branch leaked. In the code was new weapons and enemies and NPCs for Episode 3. In 2010, with the release of Alien Swarm, strings and entities referring to Episode 3 were found, including an unused prop called Hallucination, which blinks an object in and out of existence. After reading that letter, it's pretty apparent it's from Episode 3. And following that, Gabe Newell gave an interview stating that the episodic model was dead, and that is where Episode 3 completely dies. We are reading an artifact from that past. Now, before I go any further, I need to explain a few things. This is a VMF, or a Valve map file. It is essentially the save file used by Source Engine's level editor, Hammer. It's unplayable in any game. These VMFs instead hold all the raw geometry data along with references to any entities, textures, or items. However, there is more information baked into the file, and we will be taking a look at one specific piece. Opening any VMF in a text editor shows most of the map's data in numeric form, and at the top is information on the version of the map and editor used. Surprisingly, that editor build number can be used to extrapolate a date the map was last changed and saved based on the last time the editor was compiled. In the 2007 source code leak mentioned earlier is a snippet of code showing this feature, with every passing day incrementing the editor build number by 1 starting on day 0, being October 24th, 1996. And this was even before Valve had officially bought the software. So with this information, we can get a rough estimate of what version of Hammer was built, making any inaccuracy only towards the future. Any map that we extrapolate the date from cannot be modified before the date we find. So with this information, things check out. The original Half-Life 2 leaks have maps from 2001 to 2003, the leaked Portal maps are from 2004 to 2007, and the recent leak of Episode 1 and 2 maps from March of this year are from 2004 to 2013. Wait, what? 2013? Back in March, the Valve Cut content community had a large amount of official VMFs from Episode 1 and 2's development, and while interesting, whoever leaked these maps did not keep the original file dates, all being overwritten to 2017. While dating all these maps using the previously mentioned method with my friends Jackathan and Max, we discovered two folders, experiments and instances, grouped within Episode 2's maps. All of these VMFs were dated between 2012 and 2014. What's even more interesting was how instances were even mentioned. Instances are pre-made sections of maps that the game can call on for complex map behavior. And the first game to support instances was Left 4 Dead 2, released back in 2009. So what is going on here? Well, the maps are all gameplay prototypes, experimenting with instances and different ways the player could upgrade Dog to then rescue Alex. Of course, every map had different things broken in them at first, and of course, we fixed them all up. And as it appears, these maps are from the development of Episode 3 or Half-Life 3, but based on the date, it's more likely Half-Life 3. And down in the description below is a mod with every piece of playable content ever leaked for a future Half-Life title fixed up and packaged up together. We have included in NPCs and weapons from the 2012 leak, as well as a demo map of unused Magnuson animations found in Portal 2. A few of the highlights include Weapon Proto 1, a prototype combine laser weapon that uses the revolver model. We've also included a test map created by the talented Max. Dog Gates, a linear gameplay prototype that leads the player through an expanded Episode 2 mine hub to first rescue Dog from a combine cage, then fight through the Outlands and find upgrades to return and rescue Alex, fixed up by the talented Jackathan. Resource Gathering, two versions of a gameplay prototype that have the player explore their environment to collect 3 types of resources and use those to upgrade Dog. Some help in combat, or others open up areas of this huge map. This can take over an hour to complete. The HUD was fixed up by the talented Piston Miner, and the map itself was made playable by the talented Tyler McVicker. Outland Remix, a nighttime remix of Outland 10 using instances to fight randomly spawning hordes of zombies in Combine to escape different Combine fields, and each playthrough is different than the last. This map was fixed up by the talented Jackathan. And before I wrap, I want to make one one point clear. Half-Life as a franchise isn't dead. Valve would never kill it. Leading people to believe it could happen is the only reason any of us are here, and Valve gets free PR. Evidence suggests that Valve will be releasing a Half-Life VR title. However, what worries me is how many people will actually adhere to the few traditions the Half-Life franchise has. A silent protagonist, as many weapons as the designer can make, all carried at once, never truly taking control away from the player, and, for the love of God, not revisiting the Half-Life 2 universe and characters endlessly. We have closure now. We all now think that this is how it ends. Making something that changes that ending would be incredibly jarring now. Make something new, and make something different. Everything that has happened has the ability to show Valve they have been misguided. Money drives consumers. This is a point Gabe Newell has stressed many times, famously once on Reddit, only to be downvoted into oblivion. Money drives money. If you follow money, you make money. And if that is modern Valve's end goal, then fine. Good job on doing what you set out to do. But this letter reminds everyone of old Valve, when the game came first. And if the game was good, it made money and could fund the next game. Valve seeked out the best talent in the community and set them loose, and they do not do that anymore. Because I've been closely watching the community for years, and I'm now good friends with some of the best talent out there. The people that once held Valve in high esteem can't always vote with their wallets, because not everyone has or wants to drop rent on cases. We vote with creativity, which Valve used to hire and profit from. And Epistle 3 has caused an explosion of incredible art and the most mature conversation I have ever seen regarding Valve's fall, Half-Life 3's possible death, and how to move on. This is the majority opinion I have seen while reading conversation on all corners of the internet. It's your move, Valve. Let's see if the software will really speak for itself. Signed, a concerned citizen. And before we go, I would love to thank the very talented Jackathan, Piston Miner, Max, Magic Nipples, and Dank Parrot for help with this project.